Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. We're so glad that you joined us this afternoon, and we're excited to begin a new season of the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. It's great to have you here, and we want to give our thanks to the Laramie County Library for everything that they're doing. Is that my music?
I think so. It's lovely.
I was just at a school visit getting some 5th and 6th graders ready for our education concerts in January, and that was coming up from my examples for them of their How to Train a Dragon soundtrack. I'm joined by our wonderful pianist friend, Ilya Yakushev. Please join me in welcoming Ilya all the way from Russia. Ilya has been featured with the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra maybe 4 or 5 times now, at least. And then also, separately, also doing, I remember I had the pleasure of coming to see you perform Pictures at an exhibition as a solo recital here at Central High School with the video slideshows and everything too. And so he's been a kind of a fixture of our musical community on and off for many, many years, and a dear friend to many of us because of not only your incredible piano virtuosity, but also your warmth and friendship. So welcome back.
Thank you.
It's great to have you back.
We should turn this on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you can see that we have a good time when we're together, and you are in for such a treat to hear Ilya play the incredible Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto tomorrow night.
Thank you. I was told to speak closely into the microphone.
Well, and you know, I'm a little bit torn whether we should first talk about Rachmaninoff or Tchaikovsky. We have a fantastic program with these 2 great pieces, Tchaikovsky's Second Symphony, which was sometimes referred to as the Little Russian Symphony, but we have taken the liberty of renaming the Ukrainian Symphony. It was called Little Russia because the Little Russian Symphony, because Ukraine was known at that time as Little Russia. Probably nowadays they don't appreciate that. So we took the liberty of calling it the Ukrainian Symphony. But I don't know, I think we should just dive right into Rachmaninoff. There's so much to tell.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't help it but to have fun right now. I had about, 30 hours of travel yesterday to get here. It so happened that I was in St. Petersburg for just a week.
And he's talking about St. Petersburg, Russia.
St. Petersburg, Russia, not Florida. And it was actually lucky for me to be in St. Petersburg, Russia, not in Florida, because
That's
you know
right.
that St. Petersburg, Florida just got hit with the latest Milton, right?
Yeah.
That was the name. But I'm still on a 10-hour difference, and it feels great, but I'm going to be making a lot of jokes, so please forgive me in advance.
Yeah, we all get a little loopy after a lot of long travel, so we don't blame him at all. But we can't wait to hear you play this amazing piece.
Thank you.
Of course, we know. Many of us know this concerto well, but there's such a great backstory to it, and you have your own personal, it's just a special way of performing it. We've had the pleasure of doing it together at another orchestra, and so I know that you're in for something really, truly special here.
Thank you. And the piece is very special, especially in Rachmaninoff's repertoire, because as maybe all of you know this story already, but I'm going to repeat it because it's very important to know this. In 1897, right, or 98, Rachmaninoff's First Symphony was premiered, and it was received very badly by the critics and his colleagues. And Rachmaninoff went into depression, very badly. He was in a very bad condition. And he couldn't get out of this condition by himself. A friend of his, Dr. Dahl, got him out of depression by using a very experimental, at that point, therapy, which was called hypnosis. And Rachmaninoff successfully recovered. And Second Concerto, the one that we're going to be performing tomorrow, was the first piece that Rachmaninoff composed after he gets out of this depression. And it becomes pretty much the best known work by Rachmaninoff. I would say that this is probably a piece that everybody will recognize as soon as you hear the first chords played by the piano.
So true, yeah. And he actually dedicated the concerto to Dr. Dahl.
Well, he better.
Yeah. You know, the sessions with Dr. Dahl were interesting. Rachmaninoff was reluctant at first to go see him, even though, you know, his family and friends said they've tried other things to try to get him out of this depression and funk, and nothing seemed to be working. It wasn't just writer's block, you understand. It was a serious depression, but also accompanied by writer's block. He couldn't write music.
I think he had an issue that was bigger than just writer's block at this point. I think it was a matter of something or somebody hurting his big ego.
Right.
Because, you know, he was this upcoming composer. Concerto number 2 is Opus 18. So that tells you that he's in the very beginning of his career as a composer. He was very well known as a pianist, as a concert pianist at this point already as well. And Rachmaninoff was really never a big composer for symphonic music, let's be honest about it. He didn't compose too many symphonic pieces.
Some masterpieces later on.
There are some masterpieces that he composed later on for orchestra alone, but for the most part he was composing for piano and orchestra, and by that point he was by Opus 18, which was composed right at the break of the 20th century. That was just Opus 18.
Yeah.
There's not much written before it, and he already by that point composed his first symphony, which is kind of a raw composition, to be honest with you, right? The second symphony is a lot more mature. It's a lot more.
It's more popular.
Master.
More beautiful.
It's very.
There was even one before the first symphony. There's
Correct, yes,
Symphony.
yeah.
It's a great little piece. It's actually very nice.
Yeah.
But it's nothing like. One of the interesting things about the Hypnosis with Dr. Dahl and everything he wrote after, including the second piano concerto and after it, which includes the second and third symphonies and some later masterpieces for orchestra like symphonic dances. But it's just his style completely was taken to another level, and his confidence in his writing, whether it be for piano or orchestra, was also taken to a whole other level. And so it wasn't just that Dr. Dahl and the sessions of Hypnosis kind of got him through a difficult depression and a writer's block. It did that too, but it also brought him somehow into his kind of musical mastery and full maturity of his powers, which is so interesting. So there's actual suggestions that Dr. Dahl said to Rachmaninoff have been recorded, and not recorded in any kind of audio recording, but they've been written down. And so we know that he literally said, you know, he would put Rachmaninoff into like a quasi-sleep state on a couch in Dr. Dahl's office, and he would say, "You will begin writing your concerto. You will write with great facility. The concerto will be of excellent quality." And that
All of them are going to write a piano.
And he said this over and over again, sometimes for an hour and a half at a time. Those 3 sentences that I just said were repeated over and over again. And that not just one time, too, many times. I think it was a series of weeks or months.
It took a while, but it was a productive while. If you consider the fact that starting in 1901, 1900 exactly, up to the point when Rachmaninoff moves to the States in 1918, that is his most productive composition years. He composes a ton of music, and once he moves here to the States, for the last 25 years of his life, he composes only 6 pieces.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Compared
But he was
to
very busy concertizing.
He was definitely. The rumor has it that he was also very nostalgic about Russia, that he was never able to revisit his home in Novgorod, and he was quite upset about that. But he was very much in demand as a performer, and back then, getting from, let's say, Cheyenne to St. Petersburg would take 17 days and not 17 hours.
Right, yeah.
Right,
So yeah, it's hard to imagine Rachmaninoff in those last decades of his life living in Beverly Hills of all places.
He actually switched a lot of locations.
Yes.
And Beverly Hills was his very last place where he passed away. But he's buried in Westchester County in New York State.
Right.
So he spent a lot of time in New York. There's a Rachmaninoff practice room at the Steinway Hall on 57th Street, right in front of, across the street from Carnegie Hall. There's a big painting and all that. So when I just moved to New York City to continue my piano studies at one of the schools there in 2000. One of the first places that we were taken to, of course, was Steinway Hall, because for every pianist, Steinway is the, you know,
The Cadillac.
the Cadillac of pianos, right? So you had to go to Steinway Hall and experience that place firsthand. And they, of course, bring you to that room where Rachmaninoff's painting is, and they say, this is Rachmaninoff's practice studio. And you stand there and you feel all of the weight of his history just pressing on you, saying, who are you and what are you doing?
Because there are some pictures and photographs and paintings of Rachmaninoff. He was rarely smiling, right? Yeah, I can't imagine that
Yes.
painting that he was smiling at Steinway Hall.
No, he was not smiling on that one. He rarely smiled.
Yeah, he rarely smiled.
Right. But I felt the pressure. That's what I was trying to say. But yes,
Yeah.
he spent a lot of time there. He loved California, just like I do, and I think Maestro is from California,
It's
by the
true.
way. And so his last location was Beverly Hills, and as we said before, he was extremely busy as a performer, but composed only 6 pieces, 3 of which are
He's great.
variations.
Yeah, that's true.
Variations,
Yeah.
variation cycles that he composed for piano solo, 2 of them for piano solo, and Corelli, Chopin, and then the Paganini variations on the theme by Paganini. That was
Like his last and greatest piano
very
concerto.
last, yeah,
It's called Rhapsody.
number 5.
Yes,
that's
very
right.
cool. So that's a little background on Rachmaninoff, and one of the other things that I find fascinating about this concerto and that backstory about the hypnosis is that there are times where I feel that Rachmaninoff is sort of putting us as the listeners in a spell, it's sort of a hypnosis trance, including the very opening of the concerto, which really casts a spell over the listener. But even several other times throughout the concerto, like near the end of the first movement, when the strings play, it's just sort of circling around, and it's kind of got a repetitive quality that it's quiet and it gets under your skin and it feels like it's putting us in a trance. And then there's
At the beginning of the second
I
one,
was just going to say,
yeah,
that
yeah.
opening of the second movement with those 8 notes, your part there, it's just, there's something very trance-like about it. And it's also sort of interesting how it's against the beat, you know? Yeah. So, and another little interesting thing about the backstory of this concerto is that you might be surprised to learn the second and third movements were written first, even performed on their own by Rachmaninoff. And then much later he wrote the first movement. It's amazing to us now because this concerto is so well known and it seems so perfect that the first movement just starts so well and it's such an incredible movement. And the way it ends and then transitions into the second movement, there's an incredible, beautiful bridge and muted strings that goes right from the end of the key signature from the end of the first movement into the second movement key, which is very remote. And it's just hard to imagine that it was ever like not a 3-movement concerto from the very beginning of his conception of the piece. So I was fascinated by that. What do you think about that as a pianist? Is there any evidence from the piano writing or anything like that that the first movement came first in your mind? I mean, the first movement came last.
Came last, yeah. I don't know. They're all beautiful. All 3 of them are beautiful. They're very well mastered, and he obviously, at that point in his life, after going through this period, when he's so dramatized by the experience of being told that he's not good, you know, he wanted to make it a big one and a good one, and he obviously put a lot of thought into how he's going to compose it. And besides just it being, in my opinion, quite a perfect composition in every way. A lot of folks don't know that Rachmaninoff had enormous hands. Like enormous, huge fingers, long fingers, like even longer than his.
No, it was said that he could easily and comfortably play a 10th on the...
A 10th is nothing.
Nothing for him, yeah.
Like
It was
a
like
fifth over.
A fifth over.
A fifth
That's
over, that's
insane.
what he
It's
could reach.
incredible.
Meaning that he could stretch that much longer than what I can do. So that means that if you have a score composed by a guy that has these huge hands,
And he wrote it for his own.
and he wrote it
play.
for himself to play in front of other people, you would think that this guy would have written a lot of fifths over an octave, meaning there would be a lot of wide and thick chords. no such thing. He's very respectful to people with the midget hands like me.
Although some pianists can't do the very opening. They have to break those
Well,
chords. Do you want to tell us about that?
there are
Yeah.
a few tricks that you can do with,
Yeah.
with those chords. He puts very wide chords in the very beginning.
It's one of the only places in the concerto where he does.
The
make
only
it acid.
actually, yeah, because in the other places you can, separate the notes, you can break up the notes so that it's more comfortable. But in the very beginning, it's a very awkward place because you're playing just big chords very quietly, which makes it very difficult as well. Just a second, just bear with me there for just a second. That's the opening chords of the concerto. That was a great warm-up.
No warming up.
No warming
Just
up.
after flying 7
Quite
hours.
amazing. Thank you. No, but that opening is a very weird opening for a concerto because, as you know, the first movement of a concerto should be fast, right?
And maybe the orchestra should introduce it.
And maybe the orchestra did. And at that point, it was very popular for a composer to actually have the orchestra play a little intro, and then the piano comes in, because the piano supposedly is the center
Yeah.
instrument of the whole concerto. But Rachmaninoff gives you that opening, in which I also hear some sort of a hypnosis kind of an effect, where he starts very quiet. And of course, I mean, this piano is a little bit tougher to handle. I'm sure that the piano we will have at the concert hall will give you this very quiet sound at the beginning of that phrase. But what an unusual kind of beginning.
So amazing.
Very strange. A great idea, and you would never hear this repeated throughout the
It never comes back.
It never comes
Many
back
people
once.
say it was, he loved the sound of bells, Russian bells, and church bells, and that there's something about the tolling of that low.
Definitely. And the reason I started talking about these chords is because he's doing something very nasty to you.
Yeah, in the pianists.
In the bottom, you have 3 notes, and I already have to stretch that much. Then on the second chord, he gives you this. When he adds a note in the middle, so you're holding this with the pinky, the F, then the C, and then you have to stretch the second finger so that you hit the D flat, and then you have to break your first finger, the thumb, in order to reach for the A flat. By the end of this phrase, you have to quickly readjust your fingers in the position for the upcoming passages that are fast. So for a guy with the small hands like this, I do have to do little tricks there so that it sounds the way it's supposed to sound.
Yeah.
I don't like breaking up the chords just because I can't reach for the top note. I'm doing some other things, but that secret will go to the grave.
You didn't hear me.
You didn't hear me say all of these things, but it's a very difficult beginning. Just right at the beginning, he gives you that, and I'm by myself. So as we say in this business, I'm naked there.
Yeah.
Which means everybody is waiting for something to happen, especially those that don't know what is about to happen. These opening chords are quite shocking, quite surprising, and then if you miss it, then you look bad for the rest of the piece, which lasts about 32 or so minutes, right? It's a pretty long time to be miserable in that stage, right? So you better make it.
Yes.
Sorry for this long.
No, I think it's fascinating.
Thank you.
And also just the fact that it goes from this quiet sort of trepidation to something more and more determined, and finally, like insistent. And there's a you could sort of picture psychologically what was going on for Rachmaninoff in finding his voice again and finding his confidence again as those chords continue, consistently growing and until it finally flourishes. And then the orchestra comes in with an incredible, wonderful theme, very Rachmaninoff, very much, some people have said that it's maybe modeled on Orthodox Russian hymn music because it's so stepwise. It doesn't have a very large range, so it has a sort of quality of that. But what's so interesting also about this passage is that for like a minute, the piano soloist is playing just accompaniment filigree. Important filigree, but accompaniment. And so you think, sometimes you might say, you know, tell William I couldn't hear the pianist at that point. The orchestra was too loud. There are times where that will happen in this piece because the piano plays so much, is rarely given a break, really. So that sometimes the pianist is actually playing accompaniment and the orchestra is playing the main melody. So that's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, and I hate it when when the conductor says, "Oh, do you think we're overpowering you there?" I said, "You should be overpowering me there because you are the main thing."
Yeah.
So there's that beautiful aspect about life.
Yeah.
And this is something that needs to be there, that must be there, and especially in climaxes. It's not about the piano at all times. It's about this dialogue between the two, the orchestra and the piano. And if you recognize properly who is playing solo and where, then it becomes, as I say, 3D rather than just a very flat kind of a picture. You know?
Exactly. In fact, I would say that this concerto was perhaps breaking new ground in the ways that it uses the orchestra in a piano concerto. The only example from that era that is similar is not a piano concerto, but Dvorak's cello concerto, which is similarly symphonic in its scope. Because prior to this time, many composers, whether they were writing piano concertos or concertos for other solo instruments, they would use the orchestra as almost like a foil, and it would be oftentimes that the soloist would be pitted against the orchestra, or the orchestra would state something musically and then the soloist would repeat it, maybe slightly varied, or vice versa. But what happens in the Rachmaninoff, similar to the Dvorak cello concerto, is that they're presenting it together. And yes, there are a few times where the orchestra or the pianist will introduce like the second theme on its own and then the other instrument will take it over. But so often the orchestra is featured with incredible solos throughout the orchestra. And we saw this too a few seasons ago when we did the Rhapsody on the theme of Paganini. It's similar there in Rachmaninoff's last and maybe greatest piano concerto that we were talking about. That piece similarly uses the orchestra with huge solos across the board. What comes to mind right away is the French horn solo in the first movement. The cellos as a section have incredible parts throughout the movements.
But by that point, you see that there's a big difference in when it was written during the composer's life. At that point, Ravel already composed his concerto in G, which is the most soloistic piece for the orchestra and most incredible, and actually the most difficult. The English horn, the French horn, the oboe, the clarinet, anybody, you name it. The whole.
That was a little later. Was it around the same time?
Around the same time, yeah. Roughly, we're talking. Ravel composed his two concerti back to back in the 1930s. So
it was later.
Yeah, so it was Rachmaninoff composed his a little later, but there were I think that we can point out Brahms as one of the composers who really put the orchestra, in his piano concertos, where the orchestra is full size, full strength ensemble.
It has a lot of features like the cello,
Others, as you said, not so much for sure. The Tchaikovsky concerto, for example. Yes, there are some solos, but for the most part, it's very much respectful to the piano, and that the piano is a soloist, but Rachmaninoff really took it to another level.
Which is also interesting because Rachmaninoff really saw himself as wanting to continue the tradition of Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky was his idol, he knew Tchaikovsky, and he wanted I think originally, maybe even his piano concertos, to take what Tchaikovsky had done for the piano concertos and take it to the next level. So it bears stating that Rachmaninoff thought of Tchaikovsky like his hero, right? And at the time that this concerto was written, Tchaikovsky had only been passed away for maybe 7 years or so. Yeah. So
1893.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about the glorious second movement?
Thank you.
Let's talk about some division here, and I mentioned this in a little online lecture that I did for the intermission too, but there's something about the number 12 where it can be divided 3 times 4 or 4 times 3. And
I gotta get my score. The rehearsal number 12, is that the one that you're talking?
so when Ilya comes in this movement, the second movement, with the beautiful sort of rocking eighth note figure, it sets up a feeling as if the music is in a big three pattern. Bum, 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 bum. And then that repeats. Yeah.
You whistle the theme.
Oh, God, no. But you'll notice when I conduct this, it's very different. Thank you for that. It was beautiful. You see that hypnotic thing again.
Well, after that warm-up with the opening of the first
Right.
I could not fail.
So Rachmaninoff is being kind of sneaky here, and the meter that we're all in actual music is in 4. But so it's my job to beat 4 against that 3. And it's just what I was saying before. It's about how 12 notes in a bar can be divided as 3 groups of 4 or 4 groups of 3. All of us in the orchestra, including Ilya, in his mind, are thinking of 4 groups of 3. And that's what I'm conducting. But as he's playing it, he has to convey 3 groups of 4, like you just
That's
heard.
right, and there's a point where the orchestra picks up these groups of 4,
Yeah.
and I have to come in on the last of the first 4 eighth notes in the orchestra, and mentally it's quite confusing because I was just doing da 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 da, and here I am with the theme. The orchestra goes da 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 ba ba.
Yes.
So
Feels early.
it feels early, but that's what you need to
Yeah.
do. So you have to quickly switch to a different way of counting
Yeah.
or hearing.
And I have to say, the first several times I've ever conducted this concerto, it was so hard. This part was really hard for me. It's hard not to hear it in that 3. And to be really clear for the orchestra where I conduct against it. Yeah, it's tricky. Now, all of that is just secondary. You don't need to know any about that because what this movement is known for is the tune. The big, beautiful, incredible tune. Well, the third movement has a big tune too. But all the movements have a great tune, don't they? He was a great melodist.
He was. That's why we keep playing his
Yes.
music. Yeah.
And distinctive melodies too. We'll talk about this later with the third movement, but almost a quasi-mixolydian, church modi kind of thing happening in the third movement. This melody in the second movement is interesting for a number of reasons. Not only is that unusual syncopation happening behind the scenes that we just explained, but also it starts after Ilya begins this little eighth note thing he was playing. The flute comes in with what will actually be sort of the end of the melody. And it comes in with a snippet of the ending, and then it's passed off to the clarinet, who takes over the melody proper. And it's just this glorious moment. And again, another special feature for the orchestra musicians that we were talking about.
And it's difficult for them as well because you have to be perfectly in tune with each other, not only by yourself, but hear what the other player is doing. And they are naked at that point because the only thing they've got underneath is me playing those da 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 da.
In a confusing
nothing
meter.
else.
Yeah.
Confusing meter. They have to listen to each other and make sure that they're together in tune and together rhythm-wise. It's a very exposed place in this movement, but yet when it will come out just beautifully tomorrow, because I'm sure it will be just a magical, glorious moment, as you said.
Yeah.
One of the beautiful findings there by Rachmaninoff, for sure.
It is, yeah. And then you've been accompanying this beautiful melody ever since you came in. Again, an example of the piano soloist is not the feature. But then you do take over the melody. That moment when you say you have to come in and it feels early. What happens is the orchestra takes over those notes that you were playing, and he has a brilliant orchestration to try to simulate the sound of a piano playing those. So he gives it to clarinets But to make more of the sound of the piano attack, he quietly has first violins plucking it with the clarinets.
Which is also very difficult
It is
for the
also very
violins.
difficult, yeah.
Because plucking something this quietly and evenly,
Yeah,
and
it's
make sure that
divided.
you match his sound and make sure that you're in sync with the clarinet.
Yeah.
That's another place where it's extremely difficult.
Very difficult.
While I'm trying to play a melody that's supposed to be played by the wind instrument with a percussion instrument, on the percussion
Yeah,
instrument.
the
Ba, ba, ba.
So you're trying to be
And,
as smooth
and I have
as
to be
possible.
as smooth as possible so that melody doesn't sound like clunk, 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 which that's how I usually sound. But in this particular case, I really need to put some special efforts into making it a very singing kind of melody, which is difficult. So that one, what, chunk of music, which is what three pages in my score, is probably the most difficult part in the whole concerto. So when you're
And it
listening to
sounds
it
easy, you
tomorrow,
would never know.
yeah, you would think that it's easy. That's what we get the big bucks for. For all that embarrassment.
Believe me, there are other parts that sound a lot harder and they're flashy, but they're not actually as hard.
Those that are loud, fast, very fast, and very loud, those are easy.
Like your entrance into the
They're
third.
very easy.
Do you want to talk about that?
No, I don't want to talk about that.
There's a bit of a crazy moment at the near the beginning of the third movement. The orchestra has a wonderful sneaky introduction. After the second movement has ended quietly and beautifully. And by the way, I do want to point out that our friend here has some very special interpretations near the end of the second movement of some things that are in the spirit of the music that aren't necessarily all printed. And the orchestra and I are very excited to do them. In fact, I kind of shared some of them with the orchestra at the rehearsal Wednesday night. And it sounds amazing. So, yes, so you're in for a special treat with some of these things.
Oh, I'm in for a special treat because this is actually, I think it's the third time we're doing something here together because we advanced Concerto in F for the first time. Shostakovich and Prokofiev 3. So that's the fourth time I'm here. So I was really looking forward to coming back here, and especially because we already had the chance to play this particular concerto together twice
In Dubuque.
in Dubuque, and we had this moment of really emotional outburst at the end of the second performance. I jumped up from the piano and I was shaking my fist like this, showing to William how excited I was about how it went. Because it was a very special time playing it with this guy.
Yeah, likewise.
Because we really, I thought that we really got this concerto to be just right in that
Really in
performance.
sync with each other,
Yeah, I hope that we'll
And
we'll
you've
do
played it
something
with so many orchestras and great conductors, and so you paid me a great compliment.
No.
It's a compliment.
Okay, we'll talk about that later.
I owe you some money. No.
I think you do. Thank you.
So then the finale comes in and it kind of does away with the beautiful spell, and I'll say it again, hypnotic spell that the second movement ends in. And it kind of brings us back to daylight, if you will, and quietly builds. And then the piano comes in with a kind of wild gesture. Talk about something confident and exuberant. And then this whole third movement is kind of fireworks-y. It's full of excitement. There's this special tune, I mentioned it earlier, that is unusual, even in Rachmaninoff's great melodies, because it has some, what might be considered almost wrong notes in the melody. I wonder if you would be willing to play some of that second theme. Yeah, sure. It's just such a great melody. And of course, some of you might remember in the 1940s and later, it became popular, Tin Pan Alley type of song. Full arms, full moon and open arms, I think. it's
Something
called.
like that,
Yes. Yes, and that's a good point. Right after that, again, we get back to that hypnotic, meandering and hypnotic stuff. That's where there's the hardest pianissimo cymbal crashes in the repertoire.
That's right, and those guys are waiting for the whole time to play those. And I can imagine there's a lot more pressure on them than on me. Trust me.
Well, yeah. We're not joking. In the world of orchestral percussion, the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto is on every audition, and it's something that every percussionist fears. It's unusually hard to play crash cymbals extremely quietly and consistently quietly. And that's what happens right after that big tune, that beautiful moment. There comes something where the orchestra plucks and the cymbals go, and it's very, very hard. So
It's difficult for sure.
That was gorgeous. There's something just magical about that melody. It's glorious. We are all familiar with it, right? But just imagine first conceiving that as Rachmaninoff did.
I think he not only loved anything Russian, Ukrainian, anything Slavic. Melodies are very much influenced by Eastern European folk art, but he also was quite influenced by the Middle Eastern type of melodies.
Yeah.
And he uses that. I think it almost sounds Middle Eastern.
Yeah. And other people have said, I'm sorry, to interrupt. Other people have said it also has a similar quality to a Native American sort of war cry.
Right,
When you hear
right.
that,
Right.
there's something about that. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
fascinating.
It's very interesting to hear how he mixes different sonorities and different. Sometimes you would hear an augmented second there once in a while as well, like in some other pieces in preludes, for example, where you have
That's very Middle Eastern.
where you have this prelude. This is the middle section of the G minor prelude, the very famous one. But that melody very much sounds like the one from Rachmaninoff Second to me.
Sounds like a soundtrack to a movie like Lawrence Arabia or something.
Yeah, where Harrison Ford and his famous
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Go somewhere in Makaresh, and then you hear that.
Exactly. Boy, how much repertoire do you have at your fingertips?
Not much.
That's amazing.
But this was something that I was ready to play for you at any moment of the day and night. You know, I'm ready to play this repertoire. No, it's those are the examples of like I was always honest about this. I would never learn something I didn't love. So whatever I play, it means that I really fell in love with this piece at some point in my life. At some point, I fell in love with Chopin, for example, and started playing a lot of Chopin. Speaking of Chopin, his concertos, his orchestral accompaniment in those concertos are nothing but the accompaniment. There's nothing else.
Yeah.
There's nothing. But those are the most difficult ones to conduct for this guy.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it's constantly freedom after freedom, flexibility on top of the other flexibility, and that's rubato on top of another rubato, and it's very difficult to conduct those concertos. I make it difficult for William to conduct Rachmaninoff Second too, because I came to realization that I want to play it a little bit differently from the times when I played it when I was much younger. This was actually my very first concerto that I've ever learned 23 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, that was the concerto that I learned when I just started my studies in New York's Mannes College of Music. and I actually got to win my first concerto competition with this piece with the local extension of the community orchestra.
Wow.
So I was playing with a bunch of, you know, amateurs, but they were really. We had a guy sitting right behind me. You know, I'm sitting facing the piano with my side to the conductor on one end and the audience on the other end. So the first violins are in the back of me, right? So the third stand of the first, there was a guy whose name was Stanley. And Stanley used to play with New York Phil.
Oh, wow.
So we had a guy that used to play for New York, but he had a problem with the sugar or something, and he would always fall asleep at the rehearsal. So you would be rehearsing, and then suddenly, boom! Stanley's violin is on the floor.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but he didn't bring his good violin with him, knowing
Okay.
that
But he would like collapse, like not collapse?
no, he would just fall asleep. He would not collapse.
Okay.
The violin would collapse. Yeah, so I remember I actually have a recording of that concert when we played that was the main prize.
And your
Played-
first time with
My first time. I have a VHS.
Oh.
You folks remember what it is, right? VHS of that concerto concert, which I still keep in my little archive, and it has a very special place in that box, that little box size of that. But it was the very first concerto I've ever learned, and
you can hear him.
and I can.
collapse.
It's always there, Stanley. And we had a conductor who was an Italian American. He was very passionate, and he was also a composer actually.
Oh, I know.
And he was no, it was a different guy, yeah. But he was very passionate about what he was doing, as every Italian man out there. And he goes, Stanley! And it was every time Stanley would fall asleep, we would hear his name screamed out. So that happened several times throughout the rehearsal. But very special memories from a long time ago connected to this concerto.
And then now you do it a little differently. I was going to ask you about that
Right.
because some pianists take a lot of time to add a lot of extra rubatos. Other pianists say, no, that's not how the Russian language is. It's fast. We should keep it going. You have come to your own special realization about this. Does it have to do with taking times at the end of phrases? Is that one of the things that's changed?
It's just being comfortable with the conductor in the first place, because there are very few people that can actually accommodate this kind of, you know, wish for freedom in these textures. I hope that made sense. But William, for example, is great at you know, keeping track of what the pianist is actually doing, because a lot of people are very stiff that way, and they cannot really be more flexible than they think they need to be. So when I've played this piece, I would say 36 times in my life, and by the time we played it together, when I was preparing for those two concerts, I sat down and I thought, this is probably, I felt like I'm actually getting to be comfortable with this concerto. Because every piece that you play, there's a certain point in your life, in your career, where you play this piece several times, and then finally, sometimes suddenly, you start feeling comfortable that this is becoming it's becoming part of you. There are a lot of like Rhapsody on the Theme by Paganini.
Yeah. This
thing, it took a lot of times for it to become part of me, because that is a different kind of animal. And so I was, it took me a while to get used to that piece. And still to this day, I would say that the second one is more comfortable, closer to me than the fifth. But right before playing it with William, a year and a half ago, right?
Yeah.
A year and a half ago. That was the time when I said, hold on a second, we can do it a little bit differently. We can take a little bit of extra time here, a little bit of extra time here, make dynamics a little bit bigger at the end of the second movement, as you mentioned before. We had a conversation about this over the text messages.
Yeah.
I was getting ready to go to the airport
just a few days ago.
just a few days ago, like
Like a day ago.
two days ago, right? So I texted William that I cannot wait to see him, because I was really excited to be coming here, and I was about to go to the airport. And William says, me too. And then he goes, well, at the end of the second movement, are you planning on doing it the same way you did? I was like, absolutely. It must be sexy.
That's literally what he texted me.
Because that's what it should be, right? And William says, yes to sexy, we're doing it, great. But it's a very, it's a long journey to get to know peace really, and to make it your piece, and to have your own interpretation of that piece, especially when this piece is played by so many others, so many times, every year, every season. And actually, in a year from now, it's going to be a big 125 for the
That's
show.
true. Yeah.
So if only we could do it again next year. Well, it's going to be great. Thank you for thinking of that.
Well, it's funny what you were talking about in terms of conductors who can really lock in and stay with the soloist. I'll tell you another little thing I've never shared with anybody, but we're taking a lot of time on Rachmaninoff. We also have a symphony.
And it's my fault because I talk too much.
No, this is great. This is great. So, as a conductor, many times you have to work with a soloist, whether it's in a concerto with an instrument soloist or an opera, a singer. I've noticed that when you have a young, concerto competition winner, a young, say, pianist, violinist, cellist, or something like that, it makes my job very hard because they are inconsistent with their tempos. They don't even realize it. Even if they are very, very talented, there's oftentimes places where they don't realize they're speeding up or slowing down. And they're not doing it for musical reasons. It's just because they're still learning their instruments. Then you have a majority of the professional musicians who don't do that. They are steady. And then there's the rare class of really great artists who go back to being very unsteady for musical reasons. And I have to say the greatest ones I've ever accompanied are the ones where I have to work really hard to stay with them all the time because they're bringing out so much music, so much of the passion in the music, that the music is not always steady. And I've never really talked about that with anybody, but you're one of them.
Well, so I'm in category 2.
You're in that last category.
I'm with the majority of them.
No. It's fun to really, and there are times, it's like he's imitating Shostakovich when Shostakovich was on tour in the United States in the 1950s. Do you know about that? Where he was forced to be on tour and represent the Soviet Union, and he was forced to go to public events, and very reluctantly he would sometimes just say into the mic, "Thank you." And it was, he didn't know a lot of English.
It's good enough.
He didn't know a lot of English, but then what does he think of that? Are you trying to imitate?
No, I didn't know
that. So so much to talk about Rachmaninoff. Anything else you want to share about the concerto with our friends here?
Nothing. No, with all seriousness, I could talk forever. You can tell that I could tell you so many stories, but I'm looking at the clock. It's 10 minutes to 1.
Yes.
And you have a
major
whole symphony to cover. So I'm sorry for taking so much time.
Please don't be
It's been
sorry.
so much fun.
Wonderful. Gosh,
We hope
stay
you
here.
enjoy it.
So Tchaikovsky's Second Symphony is not performed as often as some of his others, especially his last symphonies, 4, 5, and 6, are performed very often. And it's a shame because the Second Symphony is a wonderful piece, and it's not a piece of juvenile, it's not like a youthful, non-master, it's not like Tchaikovsky wasn't a master when he wrote this. He was. In fact, there are times in this piece where you will hear echoes or premonitions of some of his later masterpieces, whether it's a very important hint of the tam-tam, which he brings in at one incredible moment near the end of the symphony, and also brings in near the end of this last symphony. Or it's also things like in the woodwinds, you'll hear filigree that sound a lot like the Nutcracker, which is a late masterpiece of Tchaikovsky. So the Second Symphony, I already mentioned the nickname, Little Russian, and how we're calling it Ukrainian. And the reason why it has that nickname is that this is of all the things that Tchaikovsky wrote, this is the single piece where he used more folk songs than in any other piece he wrote. He got into a lot of kind of, not bad relations or hot water, but he just didn't get along with the very important group of composers at that time in Russia known as the Mighty Handful.
The Big Five.
The Big Five or the Mighty Handful. They had another name for themselves, like Kuchka. Kuchka. Yeah. And so that was Mussorgsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, Borodin, and some lesser-known ones that you might not have heard of, like Cui. And these,
Which Kuchka in Russian means pile.
it's a big
So
heap.
literally,
Yeah.
if you actually translate it into English, it would literally be the great pile.
The great pile. Or heap.
Yeah, something like
Kuchka. But that's how they called themselves. These Mighty Five, the big handful of these composers, they embraced Russian folk songs, and that was an important part of all of their classical music. They were, part of that sort of nationalism trend that was happening at the time, whether it was with Grieg or Sibelius or Dvorak or others. But in Russia, it was these Mighty Handful. They didn't like the fact that Tchaikovsky wasn't part of the team and that he was so heavily influenced by Germanic, French, and Italian composers, and he wrote more pure music. Of course, nowadays, we think of Tchaikovsky's music as being so Russian, right? But it's true that he didn't use actual folk songs as much as some of these others. And some of the themes of some of his operas and others aren't quite as, well, I guess Eugene Onegin is an exception. But yes, so in this symphony, he uses Ukrainian folk songs specifically. Why? Well, he was visiting his sister at her estate in Ukraine. Kamenka? Is that Kamenka. Yeah, it's about 200 miles south of Kyiv. And they had a beautiful estate and a family there. And so Tchaikovsky and his brother Modest would go and visit. They were there for like a few months. And it was a really happy time in Tchaikovsky's life. It was sort of like the family that he didn't have. Being surrounded by his sister and her kids, and it was just a wonderful time. And being in the Ukraine, he heard a lot of these folk songs. In fact, there was one particular servant, I guess, or head butler, who kept singing this one tune called The Crane, which became the basis of the main theme of the last movement of the symphony. But the very opening of the symphony begins with a Russian folk song, Ukrainian, very important difference, a Ukrainian folk song, Down the Mother Volga, talking about the Volga River, of course. And this is what it sounds like. Solo French horn. You can already sense that Slavic flavor to it, right? So then that's worked out by other instruments of the orchestra in the introduction. Many times it's stated how at the time that Tchaikovsky wrote this, he was also very influenced by perhaps the father of Russian classical music, Mikhail Glinka. And in Glinka's opera Kamerinskaya, he uses a technique where he has a melody, perhaps a folk tune like this, and he repeats it over and over again, but he changes the background colors of it. So the melody may not change, but the colors of the background and maybe the instruments playing it change. And so Tchaikovsky was experimenting with that technique in this symphony, particularly in this introduction. The first movement then leads to a very fast part, and it's very thrilling and exciting. Several different themes are presented. Finally, that folk song, Down by the Mother Volga, comes back in the middle section, the development, and again at the end. It's a powerful first movement. The second movement is something that Tchaikovsky reused. Some of the greatest composers recycled good music that they wrote earlier. Rossini is a great example of that. But in this case, Tchaikovsky wrote an opera called Undine, and in that opera, it was like 1869, I think.
Yes.
So it was a couple of years before he wrote this in 1873. The opera was never fully produced, maybe not even fully finished, but there was a bridal march, which he used and he kind of refashioned. It doesn't really sound like a bridal march in the symphony, but it's just a lovely little basis of a middle movement of a symphony. What's also interesting, there's no slow movement of this symphony. And we think of Tchaikovsky's slow movements as being so beautiful. This one, as its slow movement, has this lovely little march. And here's what it sounds like, with the clarinets and bassoon over a timpani. It's very much in keeping with the very sort of sunny and happy feeling of the symphony as a whole. It's perhaps one of his happiest pieces, reflecting the time that when he wrote it at his sister's estate. It doesn't sound like a wedding march to me. Some people have said it sounds a little like Gounod or something else, like some other famous march. But it's pure Tchaikovsky.
Can I stop you
Please,
for just
yeah.
1 second? I know we're really short on time. Speaking of bridal marches,
Yes.
sorry about that. So you know that there are several melodies that are being used for the entrance of the bride with her father, or however you want to arrange this, right? So there's a famous Bach's melody that goes da 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 dum da 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 dum ba da dum da da. It's a beautiful melody. Everybody wants to walk to it at the beginning of the ceremony. So it comes from it's recycled theme.
Oh.
The original version was the opening statement of one of his cantatas that was in German called Ich stehe mit einem Fuß in Grabe.
Oh no!
I stand with one foot in the grave. And none of these people that choose this melody
Know that.
are aware of the original name for this melody.
No.
I apologize for
No,
this
that's good.
interruption.
In our country, more popular is the Pachelbel Canon or the two famous wedding marches, Mendelssohn or Wagner. So yeah, that's funny. Tchaikovsky brings in another Ukrainian folk song in the middle of this march tune, and it sounds beautiful. It's Slavic. It's the tune "Spin, Oh My Spinner." And then the third movement is a wild scherzo. It has very Tchaikovsky-like feeling in the middle section where it shifts from a 3 feeling to a 2. I'll just play you a tiny bit of that. This is the only part, see, you can maybe see why some of those Russian composers thought this was influenced by Germanic, a little Germanic. Although Rimsky was extremely enthusiastic about this symphony when he first heard Tchaikovsky play it on the piano. And then you have the last movement, which starts with something that sounds like a little bit like Mussorgsky's Great Gate of Kiev, also about the Ukraine. This was written 2 years before Mussorgsky wrote that pictures at an exhibition. But listen, very similar opening. Biggest use of the Ukrainian folk song, that song, The Crane, the one that his sister's head butler kept whistling to him, and so much so that he joked that the head butler should be listed as a composer on this piece. That's what he said. But it's this very simple but wonderful tune. Bum, 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 bum. And you'll hear that over and over again. Again, using that technique inspired by Glinka in that opera Kamerinskaya, where he dresses it up with different backgrounds and different kinds of settings. But I have to say this symphony ends with perhaps one of the most over-the-top exciting finales of any symphony. You know how Beethoven sometimes is over-the-top, the way he ends symphonies? Like, you can think of the end of the 5th symphony where it almost sounds like it doesn't want to end. It just keeps going on and he's hammering it out. Maybe Tchaikovsky was influenced by that in this. It's one of the most thrilling and exciting endings, and the cymbal player, who was previously challenged in the Rachmaninoff in this concert to play very quietly, now has to play so many fortissimo cymbal crashes at the end of the Tchaikovsky symphony that it's a challenge in a completely different way. So we can all feel for our principal percussionist in both pieces.
There's a recording, a famous recording on YouTube of this bass trombone player who records himself from the music stand with his phone. And he's playing Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto with an orchestra and of course the soloist. and you barely hear the rest of the orchestra. You mainly hear him
Bass
playing
trombone.
his part. So in the first movement, he has a lot of boom, 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 boom. So after about a couple of minutes of material, it fades to black. It says second movement. It comes back right in his face. And he's waiting. And you hear the orchestra there, getting louder and louder, and he goes, boom! His face to black. Third movement. One note in the second movement. That's it.
That's it, the life of a...
He gets paid the same as everybody else.
It's the life of some of these musicians, especially in the percussion and low brass, where they wait and they wait, and then they play something that's extremely loud and noticeable usually.
Yeah.
And they have to come in, yeah. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Ilya. You've been fantastic.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry I didn't get to tell you more about the Tchaikovsky, but there's also a pre-concert lecture. I invite you to come to that. I'll maybe spend more time on the Tchaikovsky.
Well, because
at
he's not
that.
going to invite me to that.
You're going to be warming up. You're certainly welcome. I do want to thank again our wonderful hosts, the Laramie County Library. I don't know if you have any announcements for us about upcoming events at the library?